So, you want to own a medieval army. In 1425, a widow in England was 10 years into a lawsuit against her own government. Her husband had died on campaign in France. She was owed £33 in wages, his and his company's. She spent a decade chasing it. She was awarded 10. That is a medieval army, not the banners, the unpaid invoice. 2 questions before you buy one. Why did the richest king in Europe destroy the 2 largest banks on the continent and never repay a penny? And why, in the summer of 1415, did an English king cut up a crown and hand the pieces to his soldiers? That second one actually happened. Hold on to it. Nobody in her husband's company was fighting for free. Nobody in any medieval army was. Feudal obligation was real. A landholder owed the crown a fixed number of armed men, but the obligation was short, commonly around 40 days, and it expired whether or not the war had. 40 days does not take a city. So the system converted itself into cash. Landholders paid a tax called scutage, shield money, and stayed home, and the crown used the coin to hire men whose trade was fighting. By the middle of the 14th century, English armies were assembled by contract. The document was called an indenture, written twice on one sheet and then cut apart along a jagged line so the halves could be matched later and neither side could rewrite the terms. The Latin for teeth is dentes. That is where the word comes from. And inside those contracts is a price list. One survives in full. In 1345, Henry of Lancaster contracted to take an army to Aquitaine for Edward III. Top of the sheet, the Earl himself, 6 shillings and 8 pence a day. A knight, 2 shillings. A man-at-arms, 12 pence. Bottom of the sheet, the foot soldier. 2 pence, 2 pence a day. At home, that was the going rate for cutting corn. A cooper made 3. A carpenter, 4. A mason, 5. A man who agreed to cross the sea and be shot at was worth less than the man who built the barn he left behind. Which tells you what a medieval army actually valued. It wasn't the men, it was the horses. Across 13 English campaigns, the average war horse of a man-at-arms was valued at between 8 and 16 pounds. That is several years of his own wages, standing in a stable, eating. In 1339, the Earl of Northampton lost a single destrier in Flanders that had been valued at 100 pounds, and the crown insured them. Before a campaign, royal commissioners appraised every war horse, recorded its color and markings, and set a price. If the animal died in service, the owner was compensated. The clerks called it restoro equorum. The crown ran an insurance scheme for the horses. There was none for the men riding them. A treasury clerk somewhere had to add this up, and the moment he did, the whole system stopped making sense. Take 1,000 men, most of them mounted. Wages, food, fodder, carts and arrows come to roughly 60 pounds a day. At the start of the 100 Years' War, the ordinary annual revenue of the English crown was about 30,000 pounds. Spread across a year, that is roughly 82 pounds a day. 1,000 men consumed most of a kingdom's daily income. Edward III took 10,000 into France. The bill matches the arithmetic. His campaigns of 1338 and 1340 came to roughly 382,000 pounds, more than a decade of ordinary revenue spent in 2 years. Extraordinary taxation existed precisely to close that gap. It never closed it fast enough. Nobody had that money. So he borrowed it from the most sophisticated financial institutions in Europe, the Florentine houses of Bardi and Peruzzi, secured against future taxes on English wool. The wool never covered it. The Peruzzi collapsed in 1343. The Bardi followed. Contemporaries put the losses at 900,000 florins owed to one house, 600,000 to the other. The chronicler Giovanni Villani, watching his own city's banks fail around him, described the sum as the value of an entire kingdom. Florence blamed the English king. Modern historians are less certain. The Naples grain trade and Florence's own politics were doing damage of their own, but nobody argues Edward helped. The largest banks on the continent went down, owed that sum by a client they could not sue. Which brings us back to that crown. In 1415, Henry V needed an army for France and could not pay up front. So he handed his captains royal jewels as security against their second quarter's wages, promising to redeem them later. His own brother, the Duke of Clarence, could not pay his men either. So he took the crown he had been given, broke it apart, and handed out a jeweled fleur-de-lis and a set of pinnacles to individual knights and esquires. A medieval army was a payroll that outran the treasury until the treasury was physically dismantled. So the obvious question, If no crown in Europe could afford this, why did they all keep doing it? Because the wage bill was meant to be paid by the enemy, not out of the treasury. Look at what else those indentures contain. In one surviving contract from 1415, the king reserves a third of everything his captain wins, plus a third of the third the captain has already taken from his own men, on prisoners, plunder, gold and silver above a set value. Thirds and thirds of thirds. Capture one night, and before the man who caught him sees a coin, two other people have already taken a cut. Every man in the chain of command held equity in captured people, and the returns could be extraordinary. At Poitiers in 1356, the English took John II of France alive. The opening price for his release was 4 million gold crowns. In English money, around £667,000, roughly 20 years of the peacetime income of the English crown. One prisoner, priced at 2 decades of a kingdom. But royal captures are lottery tickets. The routine revenue came from something quieter. English garrisons in France worked out that a village could be sold its own survival. Ransack it once, then charge it not to be ransacked again. The system had a name. Pâtis, the ransom of the country. And it broke its owner. Pâtis money went to the captain holding the ground, not to the crown that sent him. Once a man's income came from territory instead of the treasury, he could not be recalled, disciplined, or switched off. And then something happened that nobody in the business had planned for. The war stopped. In 1360, England and France signed peace at Bretigny. Thousands of professional soldiers were released from contract in a foreign country, with no farms to return to and one marketable skill. They did not disband. They reorganized. Free companies formed across France, ransacking Champagne and Burgundy, holding castles for ransom. One band reached Avignon and put a price on the Pope. Unemployed soldiers, charging the head of the church protection money and collecting it. The industry had lost its last customer. The product kept running. Most of them stayed in France and starved slowly. A few looked south, at a peninsula of wealthy, permanently quarreling city-states with no standing armies of their own. One of them was a tanner's son from Essex. John Hawkwood was born in Sybil Hedingham. When his father died, he inherited a sack of wheat and about 20 pounds. In 1361, he crossed the Alps with the White Company. A skilled Florentine craftsman earned around 30 florins a year. Hawkwood's annual earnings, across 3 decades of command, ranged between 6,000 and 80,000. But his contracts were never the main product. In the 1370s, Florence paid him 130,000 florins purely to keep his company away from the city. Pisa paid. Lucca paid. Siena paid. He was not selling battles. He was selling the absence of himself. Florence eventually stopped fighting the arrangement and formalized it, putting him on a lifetime pension of 1,200 florins a year, later raised considerably. When he died, the city painted him on the wall of its cathedral, where he still is. Florence honored the man who had extorted it, because by then he was the reason nobody else could. Hawkwood died rich and died a hired man. Every florin he ever made came from somebody who could stop paying. There was one clean exit, and one man is famous for taking it. Francesco Sforza was the son of a mercenary captain who had been born to farmers near Ravenna. Milan hired him as its captain general. He married into the family that had ruled it. And when the city later made peace behind his back, he turned the army Milan was renting and blockaded Milan, starving it until it opened the gates. In February 1450, he walked in as duke. That is the only version of this business where the army stops being a cost. You pointed at the balance sheet paying for it. Everyone else just rented an appetite and spent the rest of the campaign looking for somebody to hand the bill to.